Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. It really wasn't a very good day, was it? At Stamford Bridge, it hasn't really been a good couple of days, to be honest. The Leipzig result, coupled with that performance against Chelsea, that's twice now. When Spurs really, really needed to pull off a proper performance and result against Chelsea just to make it into that top four, just for a fleeting moment, even. It just didn't happen again. It's incredibly frustrating. I'm sure for all the fans that were there, fans were brilliant. I just want to, even before I get into anything, say how amazing the travelling fans were yesterday. They were so noisy. There was one moment at 2-0 down that really, really stuck with me because all you could hear were the Tottenham fans singing. 2-0 down, and just the entirety of Stamford Bridge was pretty much quiet apart from those Spurs fans, and they were singing their hearts out. And I think that says so much about the Tottenham travelling fans. They are brilliant everywhere. I'm very fortunate enough to get around the country, to get around Europe and even the world to watch Tottenham. And everywhere, the Tottenham fans are magnificent. They really are. They deserve such a better performance yesterday. They weren't given it though. And let's crack on to that because oh, I mean, right from the start, we knew that the team lineup, it was so ultra defensive. Five defenders. We talk about a back three. This was not a back three. This was a back five. Obviously, Vertonghen, Sanchez, and Alderweireld. And then either side of them, Tanganga and Davies. And what surprised me about it as well was that I thought Tanganga and Davies might be given some license to kind of roam, particularly Davies being a more natural kind of wing back. They just didn't. They sat. It was such a defensive. Um, I think I think the one that's kind of the irony of it all is, for those of you who remember, Jack Santini brought a team, the Tottenham Hotspur team, and I think it was 2004. Wasn't long into his reign to Stamford Bridge. Spurs got a 0-0 draw. Dull, terrible game. After it, Mourinho coined the phrase "parking the bus." And who would have thought, 16 years old, it'd be Mourinho bringing a Tottenham Hotspur team to Stamford Bridge. He did exactly the same thing. Oh my goodness, it was so set up. I think personally, I would have been absolutely fine if that was the case. If the players in front of them were then given license to kind of roam and just do what they do, because ultimately there was the opportunity ahead of them to have the midfield that I think a lot of people want to see, Winks, Lo Celso and Ndombele playing together, but it didn't work like that. Instead, what it was almost like a 5-4-1 formation with Ndombele and Winks in the middle, and then you had Lucas as kind of like a left winger, Lo Celso utterly, utterly wasted as a right winger, with Steven Bergwijn up front on his own. And I think Lucas and Lo Celso's job primarily was to stay wide out of possession, to create this two thick lines of players. And in possession, they were meant to keep up with Bergwijn, support him, and give him some kind of attacking help. It didn't really work. And it stifled Chelsea for fair amounts of time. I mean, if we look back at the game, there weren't chances galore. However, with Spurs going 1-0 down not too long into the game, that system had to change, and it didn't. And I think that was probably the most disappointing thing about it all. For me, Lo Celso, I don't know, I just touched on it there, but this guy is running the Tottenham midfield. He's absolutely the team's playmaker. He sets the tempo, he gives them confidence, composure, knows what they're going to do. It all comes through him. He kind of conducts what they're going to do next. So to shove him outright, where he was barely seeing the ball, first, 50, 60 minutes of the game, so few touches of the ball. And what you then got was a frustrated player. And we know where that led to. It led to some little bits of Latin American temperament in the first half. I was actually surprised it wasn't reviewed a little more closely. He had a proper kick out at Mason Mount after he was brought to the floor, but he kind of got away with that one. And then we had, obviously, later in the game, the Azpilicueta challenge, which I said to my colleagues around me, if this goes to VAR, he's stuffed, because I could see it just in real time. He stamped on him. I know everything in slow-mo looks worse. Of course it does. But I just think in this case it was a dangerous challenge. Whether it was intentional or not, You know, you could argue either way. I still think in terms of being a dangerous challenge, it certainly was. And we now know VAR has made this kind of bizarre statement. I know we often say we want people to hold their hands up and admit mistakes, but this was the first time really we're seeing people in Stockley Park do this, and to admit they actually got it wrong and he should have got sent off, and that now has this knock-on effect of, because they reviewed it, because they gave a decision, from what I'm led to believe, there now can't be any retrospective action. So Lo Celso has got away with what would have been a 3-game ban, and that's massive for Tottenham as well, because you think where they are playing right now, if they'd lost Lo Celso for 3 games as well, I think you properly really could have started worrying about what's going to happen over the next 3 games. But he survived. Lo Celso had Azpilicueta had a big old whacking kind of bruise on his leg, which no doubt looks even more horrendous this morning with the stud marks. But going back to the tactics, it was so defensive. And, you know, I think what's worrying, I guess, is the kind of, everyone thought this was what Mourinho was going to bring, this very much anti-football, boring stuff. I don't think his CV has always played out to that. I do think he's probably got, there's been exaggerations there, but then when you see performances like that and a setup like that, I think I know why he did it, and we'll come to that later, but it just doesn't look great. It really doesn't. You know, this is Tottenham Hotspur. They've gone to Stamford Bridge before and got some cracking results. You know, in recent years under Pochettino, you know, Spurs have gone there and they got some big results. Dele Alli goals, Christian Eriksen goals. You know, they've been able to do it. They haven't had to sit there and defend. And this was very much let's try and soak up everything we can and catch them on the counter, and it didn't work at all. You know, the opening Chelsea goal, it had to be Olivier Giroud, didn't it? You know, a player that Spurs inquired about, had a look at trying to sign in January. Chelsea didn't really were that fussed about keeping him until they realised they couldn't bring in another striker themselves. So he stayed, and you know, you could have probably put money on that, couldn't you? That he was going to be the one that scored, and I thought he played really well. Actually, I think he offered everything that Tottenham have been lacking, everything that Mourinho wants in a target man. The goal, you know, maybe should have done better with his original shot. Lloris saved it as soon as the ball came back off the post from Barkley's effort. He was there, gobbled it up, really good finish. And I think it was his involvement in the second goal, which was so what Mourinho wants from his strikers. You know, he pulled out wide, really good header into the path of, it's gone completely out of my head. I think it was Mount, wasn't it, who knocked it across. No, sorry, Barkley, wasn't it? Barkley knocked it across to who then knocked it onto Alonso, and it was a really lovely strike into the bottom corner. But that was the difference, wasn't it? One team had a striker, one team had a player that could hold up the ball, and the other didn't. What Tottenham had, and I don't want to do him down too much, because I actually felt that Steven Bergwijn did pretty well in a very, very difficult, unforgiving role with very little service to feed off. It was pretty much scraps he was feeding off of. I thought his hold-up play was actually really good at times. You know, he's a very diminutive guy. He's very small. He really, I felt, had some battles against Christensen and held the ball up well. His first touch is excellent. I don't want to kind of do down Lucas, because I feel I do that sometimes too much. But what I would say is, in terms of the first touch, I thought Bergwijn was the better candidate in terms of playing up front. But my problem with that is you then lose his wing play, and he's absolutely devastating down the side as well. So now Mourinho's got this dilemma really, because Bergwijn, for me, held the ball up quite well in moments when they needed to. They just needed to get the ball to him more. But you're then losing that creativity behind him. If only we could clone Steven Bergwijn, you know, maybe they could get through this time. But no, I thought he did well. I thought he was one of the players to kind of come out with credit out of that game. Trying to think who else. For me, Lloris pulled off some really good saves. I thought Davinson Sanchez played well. I know he has his critics, but I thought this was another. He often steps up for the big games, and I felt this was one he played really well in. A lot of really physical challenges. You know, I think he's starting to kind of find his place in this team, especially with the legs around him, as it were, going. You know, Jan Vertonghen, a bit of another leggy performance. There was one moment in the second half, Mason Mount flicked the ball around him. Mason Mount isn't a speedster by any kind of stretch of the imagination. He's just, you know, a young man who's got a little bit of pace about him. But he flicked it past Vertonghen, and the turning circle was like a big oil tanker trying to turn while Mount just ran round him. And I think that's got to be a real concern for him now. It has already, to be honest. We've seen it in other games. So I think Sanchez is starting to kind of make his place in that defence. I thought it was quite interesting that late on Alderweireld was brought off and Tanganga was left on. Obviously, again, it's about the pace, but I really hope that Tanganga starts to get more starts. For me, I'd like to see him in the middle. If you're going to go with a back three, for me, sounds bad to say it, bearing in mind he was being one of Spurs' best defenders over the years, but I probably would have gone with Tanganga in there rather than Vertonghen. I know Aurier needed a rest, and people will always say I'm not Aurier's biggest fan, but I do feel that in a game like that, when you want wing backs, that was the job for him. My main criticism with Aurier is always that he doesn't track back and do his defensive load, but in a back three behind, he could have got away with just kind of being the attacking player, and it actually might have worked out better, but I understand it if the club thought he was near in the red zone, I think they call it, the physios, in terms of he was getting to an area where maybe could have risked an injury. And I felt Tanganga, although he had one chance, I actually thought he was going to go through and score in the first half. It didn't come off for him. He's such a good young player, Tanganga. I don't think he's getting enough praise from across the Premier League for just how well he's doing. I think we know at Tottenham, don't we? But in terms of the impact he's made, I think he's done so well for a guy that's literally just been parachuted into the Premier League, really. Lucas, I kind of touched him on earlier. I thought he struggled in the first probably hour or so. Like I say, his first touch lets him down too much. And obviously that head-down running style of him where he'll run into people sometimes. But what I did feel in the probably last 10, 15 minutes of the game, whereas he looked quite tired early on, which is understandable because he's played pretty much every minute. I felt in the last 10, 15 minutes he got a second wind, and he did well. He got at them. Obviously Chelsea had stepped down a gear by then, but I still felt he did well. Set up Lamela for the goal back, obviously coming off of Rudiger, but it's just about getting that combination right. Mourinho afterwards said that he didn't go with Ali and he went instead with Lucas Bergwijn and Lo Celso because he felt it was more pace on the counter. I felt it was a game where Dele Alli has always played so well against Chelsea in the past. I know he threw his little strop, didn't he, after the Leipzig game being subbed, and Mourinho wasn't happy with that at all. And that's probably played a slight part in it, but I just feel Ali's often a big game player, especially against Chelsea. Last time they won, he scored a couple of lovely goals in it. And I do feel when you've got that in your makeup, it's in your mind, you've got confidence that you can score at this stadium against this team, I kind of feel you have to play him. And I think he would have done his fair share of the defensive work as well. Talking of fair share of defensive work, Knackered Ndombele. This was probably, for me, the most disappointing performance from him. He's very much a work in progress. We know this. He's only 23 years old. But I think it was the biggest example of just how bad his fitness levels are. As I've explained before, he's on this global training program now. They're working on his nutrition, his diet, his fitness outside of football, everything about him to try and improve it. But I was sitting with some journalists who hadn't seen him in action before, ones who cover Chelsea or cover other clubs and come and see him, and just listening to them kind of saying all the same things that we speak about each week, like, oh my goodness, he literally is just walking around the pitch because he can't keep up. It's like, or he's breathing so heavily, he's just stopped and he's got his hand on his hip. Why is he not tracking back? And, you can have all the talent in the world going forward, which he does. He had some moments on the dribble yesterday where he was superb. There was one moment in the second half, quite frankly, if he'd put away a shot early rather than keep continuing to dribble, he probably could have brought Spurs back into the game a bit earlier. But for all of that, if he cannot keep up with the pace of a Premier League game, he's going to struggle enormously because the Premier League is such a powerful, physical game. I think the other thing as well that concerned me, probably, I think fitness is something you can fix. Fitness you can work on. He will get there. I firmly believe he will. I think maybe what worried me before, more than that, is the fact that he just spends so much time on the floor. He is a big guy. I've stood next to him, I've interviewed him before. He's a big unit of a player. But he's just, there was one moment he got a whack on the head and it was like the lightest slap and he stayed down for a good 5 minutes. He's going to get whacked. He's going to get knocked. He's going to get tackled because of the languid dribbling style he's got. He's going to be brought down by people, frustrated defenders. But if every time he looks like he's been shot, essentially. Every time he looks like he's got the worst injury in the world. When he gets up, he limps around for ages. There's just this mental toughness that I think needs to come. His near namesake, Dembele, obviously, it's the role we're looking for him to fill. Dembele was, we knew. I used to watch him walk through the mix zone. He limped like an old man after matches, but during the game itself, he was powering around. If he went down, it was a serious injury. But on Dembele, it's just like, bang, just lightest of touches, and he's down, he's holding himself, and he genuinely looks injured. We're not talking about a performance of the referee. We're talking about a guy who looks like he genuinely feels he's absolutely been smashed through a bone or something. It's a real mental fragility that Mourinho, having seen the way he's dealt with other people in the past, you think of Luke Shaw immediately. He does not like people that kind of give in to their injuries, as it were, or knocks and whacks, and that's very much the complete opposite of what we're seeing with Eric Lamela. Eric Lamela came off the bench and once again, I felt, was a game changer. Obviously, more directly in this sense because it was his cross that Rudiger knocked into the goal. Mourinho loves Lamela. Massive, massive admirer of Lamela because although he's got these injury issues, we know he does. Every time he's come back, he's immediately offered his services to Mourinho. He hasn't trained or anything. He will say, if you need me, boss, for 10, 20 minutes on the bench, I'm there for you. And we had this bizarre situation at the weekend where I watched it unfold. I tweeted about it at the time. He and Mourinho were having this intense conversation before he went to warm up. I said at the time, I presume it's, he's having a proper talk. How many minutes can I get out of you was what Mourinho was saying to him. But it kind of turned out afterwards that Lamela was saying, I'm really not sure how much you're going to get out of me. He must be feeling whatever, issues he has. And I mean, he still hasn't trained. From what I understand, we're not talking about a guy like a Ledley King thing where he cannot train. He's unable to string together a week's worth of training. It's not that. It's more, we mustn't forget he had 13 months out with those hip injuries. And what I understand, from people I've spoken to inside the club, that for Lamela now, it's just a case of, he's so sensitive about his body now, and he feared during those 13 months that he would never come back and play football. And if anything, I'd say he's come back and he's probably in his performance been better when he plays than he even was before the injury. But the byproduct of that injury is that now he's so aware of any little kind of pull or pain or anything that actually has kind of made him, quite vulnerable, I suppose, mentally, in terms of being worried about causing any further issues to stuff. And that's from what I'm led to believe is why he hasn't really been training too much in recent days while he's still on the way back. But then he goes out there and he puts in a performance. And Mourinho called him amazing. He said, you probably think I'm stupid only playing for him 20 minutes because he was that good. But he said it was touch or go even in the warm-up as to whether he could actually come on because we weren't sure. And that's Lamela, it's something he's just going to have to get over. I think we've got 8 days till Wolves. I think that's going to be massive for him to just work on through some of those and get some actual training sessions under his belt and get some confidence. He is playing so well, and if he's come through this game without injury, then that's going to boost his confidence as well. Same with Ndombele. Although there was a lot to be desired in his performance, his tracking back was terrible. On the ball, massive asset. Off the ball, a bit of a passenger, really, quite frankly, at times. But he's got through 62 minutes. For him, that's a big thing. It's more match fitness in those legs. He needs to go away this week and absolutely work so much on that fitness. I cannot stress enough. And I've explained this before, how he's very quickly elevated to the top level of football. Was playing in the French, I think it was fourth division, only about 3-4 years ago. So his body's been on this suddenly intense journey up to the top level of football and now the most physical league in the world. But you respond to that. You work harder. You get mentally tougher, and that's how you kind of improve and become that player. Lo Celso, I feel Lo Celso's comes into a very physical league, and I feel he's taken to it really, really quickly. Maybe slightly took to it too much yesterday, but you know what I mean. So that's on Ndombele, that's Lamela. I've got to touch on a certain 18-year-old Irishman that always comes up, Troy Parrott. Every press conference, every match, I get bombarded on Twitter. Ask him about Troy Parrott. Right, without getting too frustrated at this, because I understand the frustration from people. But what I must say is we've asked Mourinho about Troy Parrott so many times, whether it's myself or other journalists. He has always said the same thing. He is not ready. He needs to work harder, and then he will get his chance in time. I understand people are looking for other teenagers. They're comparing Rooney, Mason Greenwood. I saw today, other young players. The Arsenal fullback whose name's completely gone out of my head. The other teenagers out there. But I think there has to come a point, and I don't want to, dig out anyone, especially a young teenager, but there has to come a point when we have to then stop saying, oh, he deserves a chance, he deserves a chance, deserves a chance, until we start actually thinking, why is he not getting the chance? The club have really high hopes for him, massive hopes for him. He's signed his new 3-year deal, earlier this month. They have massive hopes for him. But I think you then have to look at the point that Mourinho isn't playing him. Some people will say, oh, Mourinho does that with young players. He's actually got quite a good record with some young players. So it's kind of a mixed one for that. But then you have to look back to Pochettino. Pochettino said no different to what Mourinho's saying. He said exactly the same. He is not ready to be considered a regular striker in the team. That's the work thing has come up. Mourinho made a big point of saying Tanganga has worked so hard to get where he is, and he's an older player. He's gone through all the levels, he's done it properly, and he said, and that's now what Troy Parrott has to do. He has to work incredibly hard. Pochettino was very similar. This is just a kid. Don't get me wrong, I get the whole he deserves a chance. Put him on there. What can 10 minutes hurt? No, my mindset's the same. I don't understand personally how, if you're looking for someone at the end of a game, 10 minutes, you have a striker who has that ability to score goals. But then, because I'm a journalist, there's also the part of my brain that says, as I said before, why is he not getting a chance? And I think that's when we have to start looking a little bit deeper. We can't completely always just say, oh, it must be the manager's fault, because we've had 2 managers now that aren't playing him. He's a very young guy. He's only just turned 18. He's still adjusting to what the demands of first-team football and first-team training, the life. He's on special training programs, and Mourinho's got him doing separate stuff after group sessions. I watched the training before the Champions League game against Leipzig. Parrott wasn't even involved. I think we're very excited, understandably, about a really young, talented player, but also a player who I just don't think even people inside the club believe he's quite there yet. I'd love for them all to be wrong. I'd love for him to be on the bench against Wolves, and I'd love to come on and score the winning goal. I think we all would. It's what we all want. We all want to see a homegrown product of sorts coming on through and doing that. But I think it's one we're just going to have to be patient about, as frustrating as it is. So, I would appreciate not being asked every single press conference to ask about Troy Parrott when I know what the answer is. But I understand why you're asking. Talking of Mourinho, the one I think a criticism, as well as the defensive setup I felt afterwards, was the way he spoke in a press conference was so defeatist. And after a derby defeat, and where the fans, a lot of them felt that the team didn't put in the passion that you'd need. I felt after he came out, it was very much. I think that the biggest one for me was, I just can't wait till we get to July the 1st, when I've got all my players fit again and we can think about next season. And he said that a couple of times now, and this time he was adding on the fact that it's going to be 3 long, hard months ahead, and it's very much like. Pep Guardiola once called Tottenham the Harry Kane team, which upset Pochettino so much. And it's almost like Mourinho himself is saying, this is the Harry Kane and Son team. I'm sorry, 2 amazing players. Are they the be-all and end-all of Tottenham Hotspur? No. It's a 25-man squad. 2 players should not be deciding how you set up in matches. Mourinho was saying yesterday that, we know the way we're set up, that if we go a goal down, that's it, essentially. We know we can't play against a high press, and we'll struggle against a low press as well, a deep press. A low block. And it was so defeatist sounding. And I think the other aspect of it for me is Pochettino would big up his players so much. He got so insulted if you ever suggested that someone coming into the team was not as good as the player they were replacing. It was a real thing with him. People get quite angry with you if you asked why he'd left out, say, Alderweireld. I remember Trippier was a question out in, I think it was in Germany once before a game. And he really got, no, sorry, it was Inter Milan, that was it. He got really funny about it. Mourinho kind of does the other thing. He's very, behind his players. Don't get me wrong on that aspect. He really has so much kind of praise for them. He says how tired they are, how they're giving him everything. But then you've got the other side of it where he's very much saying, oh, what are we going to do without these other guys? These are the guys at the stars, it almost feels like he's saying. We've spoken about the striker situation beyond enough. We know the club have utterly mucked up there. We know if they couldn't have got one in January, it's because they should have sorted it out in the summer. We know Mourinho has been stuffed by injuries. He's been stuffed by that striker situation. I agree with that entirely. But then to say that your season's almost over because you can't really adjust to not having two players, I wasn't a fan of that. Let's put it that way. I felt it sends a message to the players as well. Very much so, well, guys, try your best, but what we're going to do, eh? It's what it kind of feels like. And I think it's the wrong message to send to the fans and the wrong message to send to the players. And on top of that, despite all the problems, I accept that as well. And I think he has been dealt such a bad luck in certain scenarios. I'm not seeing a discernible style of play. I think in the early weeks we saw the more direct route he takes with Kane as a battering ram striker. And it's almost like you've taken Kane out of there and now they're struggling for a plan B or C. What I do think, and this is my hope, is that João Sacramento, I think he's 31, Spurs assistant head coach, one of the brightest coaching prospects in Europe. Like really, people rave about him. He's really fundamental to what Lille did in the last season or two. Monaco is slightly less of a direct role, but people praised his input there when Monaco were doing really well. I hope and I feel that every time Mourinho's had a right-hand man, they've eventually had quite a big influence on him. My hope is that Sacramento does similar and that we start to see some kind of slightly new feel to the way Tottenham play. I think we all loved Pochettino's Spurs at their best, were a real snarling, aggressive, fast, strong, pressing team. That was such a joy to watch. And I'd like to hope that we'll get to a different version of that, but something of that mould. And I hope Sacramento has more of an influence on that as well, because at the moment, like I say, I can't really see a style of play at all. And that's what's most concerning for me, is that they're kind of flip-flopping between tactics in different matches. It doesn't feel like they have an idea of how they're going to win the match, which they must do, because Mourinho, tactically, we know he is one of the world's best in that. And we've seen it over the years with the things he's won. It just doesn't feel like he's been able to implement it. I know it's only 3 months in, but I just would have hoped we'd just start to see some signs of it. Again, he will rightly point to the results, and in this crazy messed up league, I don't know if he's still there, but certainly pre-game, only Klopp I think had secured more points since Mourinho joined Tottenham. So he's grinding out results. I just worry in the last 2 matches we're just starting to see a little bit more of the shakiness of Tottenham, the fragility of them again. Looking forward, a massive game next Sunday. As I say, 8 days rest, but Wolves, they're starting to get it together. They've had a really good season. Won again today, 3-0 against Norwich. Obviously, Man United won as well, but Wolves, Spurs only just beat them away from home. This is going to be a tough game, and Spurs cannot set up defensively at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in front of 60,000 or so home fans next Sunday. They can't. They're going to have to go for it, and I think in terms of the league, they have to go for it as well. Spurs can't rely on 5th place potentially being a Champions League spot if Man City's appeal if Man City's appeal isn't successful. I want to see a much better Tottenham. The tiredness excuse won't wash in 8 days' time. They'll have had a proper rest. You'll have the real time to work with the players on patterns of play, positional stuff. I'd hope we see a lot more. Moussa Sissoko's back outside training, not with the team yet. Mourinho thinks he'll have him back at the end of March in training and then hopefully be able to play games throughout April and May. He even said yesterday he hopes, his dream is that Son, Kane and Sissoko are all available for May to play the final games. But everything could be done by May. If Tottenham don't find their rhythm, their momentum, they've got some great players. They are not the Harry Kane and Son team. They're just not. Bergwijn's a great talent. Ali's a terrific talent. Mourinho was getting the best out of him. He needs to get back to that. Lucas on his day, has given us some wonderful memories at Tottenham Hotspur. He can do the job. Lo Celso is fantastic. Ndombele, there's so much more to come from him. There's some young kind of talents we know are coming through as well. Probably not going to come through this season, but there's enough there that this is not a team based around two players. So hopefully things improve against Wolves. It was such a disappointing day yesterday. Leipzig was exactly the same. It's not all over in the Leipzig game. We'll be back out there. We'll be out there in Leipzig was it March the 10th? The game's coming so thick and fast, I can't even remember when they are. But yeah, that's not over. It's going to be incredibly tough. Leipzig, I thought, were really good. They're going to be even better at home. Spurs are going to have to be very clever in that game. He may set up defensively, but whether that's going to work or not against a team like that, I don't know. I just wonder whether Spurs have to go for it. But I want to see more from Mourinho, and I want to see more from the players. And I want to see more confidence and not this kind of defeatist attitude, because it's almost like giving in to the excuses. And we know as soon as players and managers do that, that's when heads drop and there's no getting them back. So let's see what Wolves brings back at home, and hopefully we'll have something positive to talk about next week. Catch you then.